And okay. Can you guys all see my my PowerPoint again? Okay, great. So for today's agenda, we are going to spend just a couple minutes reviewing kind of the basis for why we're hosting this webinar, and specifically in relation to the Local Food Choice Act. Then we're going to shift over to Q&A with our panel. And then we will wrap up with running through a preview of Arrow's food safety tool for home producers. So briefly, the focus of this workshop isn't on the nitty-gritty details of the Local Food Choice Act, but we have a recorded webinar that does dive into the details of that law. But in its most basic terms, the Local Food Choice Act was passed by the Montana legislature in 2021 and then amended slightly in the 2023 legislature. And basically, it's kind of can be termed more or less a food freedom law. And the focus of the law is to allow production of food from production and sale of food that's produced in home kitchens. So some people think of it as an extension of the cottage food law. And then some people feel like there's some important changes there that it opens up liability for producers. So Arrow's kind of focus in our project on education and outreach on this law is to really focus on the opportunities for this law. And one of those being making sure that folks understand the legal liability that is presented from the Local Food Choice Act. So in that we folks can now produce food from a home kitchen, those particular products are exempt from licensing, inspection, and regulation. So there are some limitations. And again, the nuance and the devil's in the details of the law, but in general, meat, low acid canned food, and then other products that are exempt from being able to be sold under the Local Food Choice Act include anything with CBD or alcohol. So this law also includes raw milk. So important things to know is that these products can only be sold within the state of Montana, and every law has a little bit different cottage food law, and this other states that have what is known as these food freedom laws also have slightly different regulations. So just know for sure as a producer that if you're producing here in Montana, Wyoming's laws might be slightly different. So again, with the increase in opportunity, there's also an increase in liability. So in a normal setting, a lot of these kind of food safety risks are mitigated in the inspection and regulation process, and just making sure that folks understand that that's not the case with the Local Food Choice Act. So the law changes the way and the things that need to be licensed or sold, the products that can be sold, but it doesn't change in any way the liability or the investigation or any kind of legal implications for those products. So the Local Food Choice Act does not change the standard by which liability is determined in any kind of foodborne illness incident. So it doesn't matter per se that you are allowed to sell these products. If they are, if they cause illness in a consumer, then you're still held to the same liability. It also does not exempt Department of Health and Human Services from investigating any kind of food safety incident. So the reporting and the investigation process by which any kind of food safety incident goes through the normal channels, those still exist under the Local Food Choice Act. And then again, it doesn't change anything that the way that a party that might have been injured seeks damages in a foodborne illness incident, it doesn't change your liability or your potential risk in that area. And so the big takeaway with liability is that in actuality, it might take some of the burden of liability management off of the regulators and place it more on the individual producer. So again, in our other workshops, we kind of talked about some of the different ways to address that liability risk and identified that one of the primary ways is that people need to seek their own training and their own focus on their food safety production risk. So hence our desire to host this workshop that gives folks kind of a nuanced and an insight into what it means to be producing in a home kitchen, how we can think about food safety, and how we can manage some of the risk in that realm. So we thought that what we would do is bring together some folks with some interesting perspectives. So one of the challenges in thinking about food safety is that we have systems that are made for commercial settings and not necessarily authored or created to be accessible for home producers or to be applicable to those folks. So our two panelists today have kind of a unique backgrounds that have made us choose them in seeking some insight into this topic. I will let them speak more about their background, but we have Laura Finley, who has a long, fun list of things that she's done in the past that give her insight. And then Kristen is also has a commercial background, but is also a home producer right now. So we are going to kick it off with questions. We have until probably about the next 45 minutes to open up the floor to questions for these guys. We'd like it to be the interactive as possible. We also have some kind of questions to start off the panel. Basically, folks, if you want to just unmute yourselves and ask questions, you're welcome to do that. I'm gonna maybe ask you both, Laura and Kristen, to start by telling us just a little bit more about your background in food and food safety and what you're currently up to help us understand your perspective on this topic. And let's see, Laura, do you want to start?
Sure. So my name is Laura Finley, and I currently own Finley Food and Beverage Consulting, where our primary focus is that we teach the ServSafe Manager courses around Montana and into Idaho a little bit. But the way that I got there was sort of a roundabout loop. I pursued a degree in food science after I graduated high school. That took me a while to finish up, but I did ultimately finish up that degree. And then I moved to Yellowstone from another state, met the love of my life and father of my child, my husband, Zach Finley, who also owns the current business with me. But when I left Yellowstone, I became a sanitarian or a health inspector, first in Missoula County, and then we moved to Bozeman, where we live now. And when I left that job, I decided that I wanted to become a cottage food operator back before this current law was even a thing, I guess you could say. And so I made cupcakes and wedding cakes out of my home, and I sold at the farmer's market in Bozeman. And then after enough wedding cake catastrophes down bumpy roads and whatever, I decided that that was not for me anymore. And so I started focusing on the classes, the ServSafe Manager classes, starting out just in Bozeman, and then we expanded, and we are always trying to expand and potentially looking to see what are options to offer food safety trainings and other types of trainings for business operators, online and that sort of thing. So that's what I'm up to.
Kristen, do you want to let us know your story?
So I'm currently the owner of Orange-Eyed Owl Wild Snacks. I'm a recovering choreographer who now composes food instead of movement. I have a degree and master's in choreography and dance. And through that journey, I always had a day job in the food industry. So thusly, I have about 25 years of front of house, back of house, food knowledge and experience, and through that time have had different kind of food safety courses, but in LA and London and New York and now in Missoula. So lots of different places getting different kind of educations and understandings of how people approach food safety. And then I had worked at Bernice's Bakery for 6 years and ran the lunch program there, and very much looked after people's cleanliness and safety in that realm. And it's very important to me. And so I started Orange-Eyed Owl. I'm in my 5th season at the Clark Fork Market, so about 4.5 years in. And I started off as a home cook for that purpose. And with the Clark Fork Market, you're exempt. So I didn't need any license at that time for baked goods. And then I wanted to sell not at the farmer's market, like at a different market that wasn't exempt, and realized I needed a cottage food permit. And so I went down that road and had to get that license, which was very educational and helpful about, being in the regulated world of food. And then I did get my wholesale license 2.5 years ago. So now I do work in a commercial kitchen currently to make that product, but still sell at the farmer's market. But yeah. That's that in a nutshell.
Great. I have a couple questions that maybe we can start with. So you both, you both have been in both commercial and home settings. Can you just give us kind of some insight in how you approached food safety, particularly in a home setting, or how and specifically how that's just a little bit different than in a commercial setting?
You want me to go, Laura?
Either way, it's up to you.
So I think it's good so before I did this, I actually recipe tested in my home for a restaurant. So I had kind of this like home cooking, but in a professional manner already. And I lived with 3 people. So there was already like the idea that I needed to communicate to the people I lived with that this space was where I was going to be working, and that they couldn't come in and like start cooking their breakfast, or, we had to like decide that this is the time that I'm going to do it and negotiate, obviously. And then above and beyond, every time you go into the kitchen, to be like, this is a routine. Like, I'm cleaning myself, making sure my hair is all bundled, that I have clean clothes, I'll wear an apron, make sure everything, like your rags are clean. And then that you're going to clean all the surfaces. You're going to make sure your fridge, I mean, if you have a thermometer in your fridge, that's great. If you have an oven thermometer is really great, and that's something you don't realize, like home ovens just aren't always great. They could be really off and you have no idea. And I think just setting up a routine that you're cleaning surfaces, and you're checking that all your things are in the working properly, and the communication with other people that this now is my workspace and it's to be respected. You're going to respect it, and these other people are going to be, focus, respect. So yeah. And just like, yeah, clean rags, clean apron, hair tidy, no pets. I never have had to contend with that. But that I know is definitely an issue, like put them in the other room, somehow, like dog walking in on different time. I mean, yeah, there's so many things, but clean, and how you store your products in your refrigerator, how you store your products after you make them, making sure that they're off the floor, that your products you use are off the floor and tightly sealed, away from any kind of rodents or insects. But yeah. But Laura, if you have anything you want to add.
I was impressed by how thoroughly you covered a lot of stuff that would be covered in a food safety training. But, you know, in thinking about this, I would say almost identical things, but maybe in my own words, which is just, I kind of giggled because I do have basically the same exact perception. I don't know the word I'm looking for, perspective, but I think from a sanitarian standpoint or from a operator standpoint, I think one of the hardest things for me operating out of my home kitchen that ultimately maybe had me decide not to operate out of my own kitchen are the things that Kristen mentioned, because for me, knowing how important it is to have separation between working time and family use of the kitchen time. When I started my cupcake business and working out of my home, we did have a golden retriever, which is, it doesn't matter how much you're separated from that type of animal, the dog hair is guaranteed going to be on my clothes, on anything. So that alone was sort of one of the challenges that ultimately, I mean, I'll give you the rest of the story, but looking back on it, that is a genuine concern of mine, was like how to keep the dog hair out of the product. But then when I started, I didn't have a child. And then as I sold cupcakes at the farmers markets and whatnot, I became pregnant with our daughter and then had our daughter. And I think having her in the house and having to kind of do mom duty and do this and that, you know, we giggle, but we had like Thanksgiving pictures of like how many food safety violations can you find in our kitchen, because we've got like a baby butt on the counter and a dog over here. And I'm a former sanitarian and I teach food safety classes, you know, and those are legitimate things to, I think, you know, the more organized about a schedule, which is like not really my personality, but the more organized of a schedule of who and what, like who uses the kitchen when and things like that, and just really clearly differentiating in your mind, not to give advice to anyone, but just like, this is work time, this is family time, can be a big thing. And then, you know, I'll probably pause and then we can potentially touch on these subjects as we go or hear what people's questions are. But just in thinking about this type of training from a sanitarian type viewpoint, I think one of the things that I see on like cottage food groups where people are talking about different questions is that sometimes it surprises me how incorrect that, well, for one, how incorrect the information is online that people hear and then take as facts. So like something as simple as setting up a sanitizer in your kitchen or knowing the difference between cleaning and sanitizing. Sometimes it surprises me how few people know those types of things. And so I think, you know, being a part of trainings like this, where you can go over that and then potentially taking, you know, food handlers trainings and things like that can be very beneficial to people who are just starting out or just kind of like feeling the water of working in a home kitchen, that sort of thing. I will actually pause now.
Thanks, you guys. So I have a long list of questions, but let me give it some time and space. Does anyone on the call have a question that they'd like to pose to the panelists?
Hey guys, I sure appreciate your perspectives on cooking from home. I know it's something that is a big deal in our house because we just have a bunch of teenagers who always want to use the kitchen at odd hours. And so that separation is really difficult to get in a house. And so I'm always looking for tips on either how to do that, or the problem that we've had is how to do, like, there are very specific laws, and I'm excited to hear if those have changed in the last legislature system, about, like, it has to be homemade if it's homemade, not done in a professional kitchen as a home cook kind of thing. So those are kind of weird things that I don't understand how to do, and I'm sure maybe we'll get into that a little bit later, but I'm hoping that we can touch on that some.
I may be able to answer that question, but I'm not entirely sure I understood the question. Can you rephrase the last part of what you said?
Yeah, I'm good at asking not questions, so thanks. I want to know if there have been any changes to the laws or clarifications in the laws since in this legislature about how to use the home cooking clause in not your own home kitchen, or if there's any kind of accessibility for that now, or if it is very much just like professional versus home kitchen still.
Yeah, that would have been a great thing to clarify. So the way that the Local Food Choice Act, the amendments that happened in 2023 almost entirely addressed concerns with more or less what markets could basically. There's the Farmers Market Law and the Local Food Choice Act, and they were in conflict. The legislature clarified and added Local Food Choice Act products as an allowable product to be sold at farmers markets. So basically all they did was try to alleviate some of the conflict that's been happening between and confusion about whether or not markets could allow it or could disallow it. And they own, and I'm happy to kind of go down that rabbit hole specifically, but the way the law is written, these products need to be made in a home kitchen. So basically any licensed entity, in the very start of the law, it basically says, if you are licensed as any of these things, you are excluded from this law. So if you are a licensed dairy, or if you're you hold a license as another registered food entity, it excludes that so that it doesn't totally conflict with the current food code that's out there. So as it stands, you cannot make local food choice items. You cannot make items to be sold under this law legally from a commercial space.
Cool, that clarifies. Thank you.
Yep.
And I'm interested in the other rabbit trail, but we don't have to get to that one quite yet.
Are there other questions for the panelists?
Hi, I have a question / inquiry. My name is Liz Hansen. I work with Mission West Community Development Partners. I'm the Food and Ag Program Coordinator, and I'm always trying to find resources and tools to help our clients be able to navigate the laws and regulations within the state and beyond, to try to make this as easy and successful as possible for producers and value-added agriculture businesses. I guess the question I have is there a resource that you know of that would make navigating all of this easy, or do you have an idea to create a resource that would make it easier or better, if that makes sense?
I think that's what Arrow is doing right now. I was very curious about this Food Freedom Act, and I guess, was it last year that I took the class with you, Sam? That was the value added class, and it covered all of the freedom food stuff, which also then clarified the difference between the cottage food permit and then what you need to do to be a food within the Food Freedom Act law, and all of those resources on the Arrow site for the value added stuff, I think is really well set up from those workshops. And then I read through this tool that Sam's gonna introduce later, but it has tons of information, like play by play of like clean, safe, all those things for someone who has never dealt with food safety in their practices. So that I think this tool will be really helpful.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Liz, Liz and I are colleagues in my other job. So if you, and for everyone, you know, I think sometimes it's a need for a little bit of an assessment, like figuring out what information is the most helpful for folks. So you know, I think right now a lot of people are in this phase of like, what is this and what does it mean? And then hopefully once people understand that, then they can get to this point of like, oh, I can do that. But if I do it, how can I do it safely? So we, the food safety toolkit that we're going to go over at the end is kind of focused on the food safety part. And I think that the DPHHS is still trying to also figure out their role and how to communicate all the regulation, because the regulation is cumbersome and hard to understand. So I can reach out and just make sure that you have access to the shareable information from Arrow.
That would be fabulous. I guess also if I could add to that, you know, if there was a particular part on this food safety journey that you guys found most difficult to navigate or challenging to figure out, if you know anything stands out to you in that way.
Do you have folks that are like, are they specifically people that would kind of fall under this category, or do you have people who are seeking out various types of licensure, from like a retail license to a wholesale license, or what kind of group do you have, would you say?
We deal with everybody, kind of everyone who falls in all of those categories. The challenge we come across is people who fall under like many different categories. You know, the person who wants to do like a home production of an acidified food, but then they also want to come in and use the commercial kitchen to create, you know, some kind of like cured meat product. But then they also want to do a sauce on the side, and they're not sure if they want to do it at home or if they need to do it in the commercial kitchen. And they kind of, you know, they have these great ideas and these wonderful notions to kind of progress their business, but they kind of get stuck in these with the regulations, and like, is it better for me to do this at home? Is it better for me to do this in the commercial kitchen? So I'm trying to find a way, I guess, to present resources and navigate some of the more challenging aspects of some of these laws and regulations, so that folks can look at some stuff and be like, oh yeah, this is obvious, which I know is probably not a realistic goal, but you know, trying to make it as easy as possible so some of these people who have these wonderful ideas just can have a fairly clear path to look down and go like, yes, I know I need to take these steps in order to do this, and get them kind of down the path far enough until, you know, we can be more of like a processing assistant instead of a law and regulation interpreter, I suppose.
I think in general, and I'm not joking by this, I mean, you can give out my phone number to people who are trying to figure it out, because, you know, as a former sanitarian, a lot of calls come in with those types of ideas, you know, and people a lot of times when they reach like the phone call to the sanitarian step, if they even make it to that, because a lot of times they're intimidated by it. But when they do make it to that, a lot of times people are disappointed because to find out that they do have to work in a commercial kitchen, or they maybe found a good deal working for a friend's kitchen, but then they also want to make stuff at home and things like that. And then they're disappointed to hear that they can't do things. So I would like to say that it would cure all of the questions, but one of the things that I've been playing around with in my head with even like taking the steps to set up a class is that's one of the things that I've wanted to try to capture to help people with, like the whole starting a food business. Like if I were to teach a class, I would want it to be called starting a retail food business. And I'm looking at doing that in the fall. Being in this meeting makes me remember that I feel like I've played around with like, should it be in person? Should it be online? And being with people who are from all over the state makes me feel like something like that would be beneficial online. But one of the troubles I find in trying to set up a training for people like that is I worry about like having a training, but then some people are geared for a farmer's market and some people are geared for a retail space and some people are geared for a wholesale space. And then you have a bunch of people sitting around bored because it doesn't apply to them, but one of the things that I'm trying to figure out how I would do would be to offer courses that are not just like the management level certification to meet the CFPM requirement, but courses to help people figure out the laws. Because I'm trying to think like I feel like somebody calls me and I could potentially help them figure out what they needed to do to start their business, but I'm trying to think of like how I learned that information, and the only thing I can think of is just by working at the health department for a while, and so the last thing I'll say, and because I don't want to be like too far off topic, but one of the in addition to that, calls that you get at the health department would involve, so say somebody gets to the point where they are going to get a retail food license, they know what they're going to do, but then they call the health department and say, I'm going to build my own food truck, but I need to know all of the regulations. And all the sanitarians can really say is, the whole food code, which is obviously not attainable for people to just like sit down and read the food code. There are checklists or like similar to like the tool that I think we're going to go over in a little bit, but I have seen checklists that can be helpful to people when setting up certain businesses to try to guide them into how to set up a retail food space. The training that I do currently offer, the ServSafe Manager one, does go over a lot, like basically everything you would need to know for the food safety aspect of it, but it doesn't cover a lot of like the building aspect of it if you were to work in a, build your own commercial space or things like that. But if anybody in the group finds value in anything that I've said and has any ideas on how to create a training for people that would be helpful, I'd be interested in talking about it now or at another time would be fine too. So
I think what was useful for me, I mean, I have a basic food safety idea, but like doing it within like a very regulated way from the cottage food permit, having what it asks of you. So I guess my point is through all this application process of what the application asks of you gave me a training of like how food is regulated here in Montana. So like doing the cottage food permit, you had to, do your recipe in ounces and the order that they're, the amounts that they are, you have to do all the preparation, and then you have to do how it's packaged and how it's cleaned. And that's just the cottage food permit. So it kind of gives you an idea of like, these are the things I need to know for the application and checklist, and all those things are in the food safety tool. And then you get to the wholesale application, and then it takes you through all the things that you're going to need to know. Like, do you know where your food is stored? Do you know the temperature of your refrigeration? How are you going to do it? How are you going to log it? Do you know how are you going to get the food cooked to the right amount? How are you going to do it? How are you going to log it? To do the application, I guess would be like, this is what you would need to train people on. And then I'm in this other project now looking at a food establishment license application, and it looks like just like the wholesale sale application. So like you need to know all the things that I just said, and I kind of like sets it up for like it was an educational process. Like, and I kind of already knew it, but like know your plumbing, know your like all like what is indirect plumbing, like all the things that come kind of in a food truck. If you're a wholesaler, you need to know what your commercial kitchen is going to be like. If you're setting up one, you need to know how you're going to need to make it. So, but yeah, to have someone help you through that, because it's just like when you're looking at it by yourself, you're like, there's a lot of information. And especially if you don't have any food safety knowledge at all, it's like Greek, you're like, I don't know. So,
Well, and that's a good point. And that's one of the things that I've thought about doing in the training is having people who are ready to do a retail application, and literally having seats for everybody with the application and saying, okay, we're going to go through and do your application right now. Because I feel like the benefit to that is not even in I hate to say this wrong, but it's not even in the knowledge. It's that a lot of times, just like you're saying, people really get intimidated by the applications and think that it's asking them something that it's totally not. And so having somebody there to handhold, while going through the application process is definitely something that I've thought about. But just an idea, kind of like as a tip, this may be something that you can use to help people, Liz, is like, I've worked for Missoula County and Gallatin County, and I did a little bit of work in Park County. And I'm not sure how Park County does it now, but it was interesting being a temporary sanitarian in a small county, because places like Missoula and Gallatin County have an application that does guide you mostly towards everything you would need to have a licensed kitchen. But I've worked in smaller counties and they might not even have an application process, that you just sort of call and talk to the sanitarian and then they come out. But a tip that anyone could use is you could work in the smallest town in Montana. You could still go to like the Healthy Gallatin website and use their application, and you could look at that when you're trying to formulate like how to whatever, but obtain licensure, I want to say. But also though, I really do think, and it might be when I speak with people, I do typically try to just assure people that it's not as difficult as it seems, and that a lot of the times it's just helping people kind of take the first step to get moving. And then once they get moving and realize they can't make ceviche and pulled pork and all the different things that they are passionate about, then after that, it goes a little bit smoother, I think.
That's awesome and helpful. And I just want to say, Laura, I think there is a pretty heavy need for that retail food startup class. And I'm going to grab your contact info and I will be a hold of you about that.
Yeah,
we can't work something out there.
I'm trying to motivate myself, and I could be convinced otherwise, but I'm trying to motivate myself to do it in October. I think even for myself, I'm a little bit intimidated of the idea of offering like an online training because I've never done it before. But just like I just said, taking the first step for me and having a date to kind of try to do that, I would absolutely be interested in providing something like that.
There's a big need for that, and there kind of seems to be a little bit of a gap there in some of the available resources out there for food businesses. So I'll talk to you about that later.
Yeah, I've always said, like, and this goes for everything. When I worked at the health department, I really saw the need of, like, I always joke, and maybe one day it'll be a reality, but it would be helpful if there was a book on how to start a business, or how to start any business, but especially how to start a food business. I think part of the trouble is that different counties or different jurisdictions do it different ways, but I do think that it's not that unreasonable that And two, one other tip before I go back, we can go back to other topics, but one thing that I've learned about different things that I'm trying to learn about is that there's a ton of podcasts and things on YouTube for whatever people are trying to learn. So if they are looking to start a food truck or different types of things, sometimes it's a matter of like not needing to recreate the wheel. The information might be out there, maybe not specific to Montana, but maybe close enough that it can be useful.
That's what I'm hoping to find, and I'm doing a little project to put it all in one place, but it's just kind of a matter of how do you make it understandable.
Tangible.
So, but yeah, I'm excited about the toolkit Sam has, and I think that'll be really cool. So
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Unless cut me off if you have a question, anyone else, but so I think one of the things in thinking about this topic and in about so maybe Laura and Kristen, you can let us know what you think about food safety trainings. So I think one of the unfortunate things is like, of course, like we don't know what we don't know. So in thinking about a food producer that might be starting a new product line, I think you can get food safety training, it seems, from like the National Restaurant Association. So like a very specific kind of food handling focus. There's like resources that you jump over when you're into like manufacturing. But I guess maybe if you guys think that those resources are applicable, or ones that you think are more applicable, maybe it depends upon the producer's scale, so, or their product. Because I think, one of the unfortunate things about a shift from the cottage food law to the food freedom laws is that it doesn't allow people to necessarily have a nuanced view of what high-risk products are, or how to determine what's risky and what's not. So do you guys have any just input on existing food safety training resources that are out there?
It's hard for me to say. Most of my education came from on the job training. And then I've gotten, short courses in basic food safety through that. And then practices mostly through just the everyday of like knowing your temperatures when it's cool, knowing where to place the eggs in the walk-in, knowing how much you have to reheat soup to that it's safe. And then also I was in a leadership place, so I was training other people to know those things. But as far as like exact resources, I can't speak to that exactly. That's why I loved looking through the tool that you're going to introduce, because it just kind of lays all those things out. So you got the cleanliness and the hygiene, the importance of allergens in labeling, the importance of food safety, temps and times, and storage. Those things are all laid out, and that's what any food safety class would do. So I love that you made that, and I think it's a great like point too, to like, where's the resource? And like, well, I know of this one and it's up to date. Because when I feel like the food the danger zone for food has changed. So like, I think it was 42 and below was what you were supposed to keep it at, but now I think it's 41 or even 40 and other things that I've read. So it's like to have also up to date and what people are looking at here, because those things can change.
This is definitely my area of what I do is food safety trainings. So I would say that if I was starting out as a home producer, I think that from a cost perspective, that the online, and I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not like the biggest lover of the National Restaurant Association and ServSafe. Not to say I don't like them, but I'm totally open-minded to all the different programs they are, even though I'm a certified ServSafe instructor. So I'm not trying to sell this, is my point, but they do offer a what's considered a 4-hour food handlers training that can be done online. There's no certification, so it's not going to meet the CFPM requirement, which is the Certified Food Protection Manager requirement, which is, what the state requires for at least one person in every licensed kitchen. So once you get to the, not necessarily wholesale, but once you're when you sell retail, then you're required to have at least one CFPM on site. So the food handlers that you can do online in this 4 hours does not get that certification, and that can be confusing to people. But it is fairly cost effective. I think it's like $35. They offered it for free during the pandemic for a while, which was really nice. But it's not cost prohibitive in my opinion. And I haven't done it in a while, but when I have been through or I've had discussions about that training, in my opinion, compared to the 8-hour training that I currently teach that I can speak on, of course, is that it's not that much different. And there's nothing, I think the names kind of confuse people because there's food handler and then there's manager. And really the 4-hour course is just an abbreviated version of the longer course and without the certification. And so I think as a home producer trying to get kind of a start on some food safety stuff that you would gain through working in restaurants, like Kristen is saying. But if you haven't had the opportunity to work in restaurants and you're just starting out, I would say the 4-hour training would be a good resource and worth the time. When it comes to the 8-hour training with what is a 5-year nationally recognized certification. So if you go through one of the Certified Food Protection Manager trainings, then you get a certification that can be valuable to you here or if you move, which is nice. And that training, I think there's benefit to anybody doing it. It goes over all the cooking temperatures, it goes over the temperature danger zone, it goes over all the stuff that we've been talking about, just sort of in, a little bit more detail. And so if you take an 8-hour training like that, then you would take a 90-question exam at the end, and then assuming that the person who's taking it passes, they would get that certification, which is nice, but maybe not necessary depending on if you're just starting out versus if you're trying to get, into a licensed kitchen, that sort of thing. The last thing I want to say just about trainings, just to be clear, is that ServSafe and the the ServSafe and the National Restaurant Association are pretty well recognized names, but there are other training programs that offer the CFPM type courses where you could go through their training and take an exam and get a CFPM certificate, and that would be, equal to the ServSafe one that everybody refers to as. I feel like I had one other thought, but let me think. Go ahead and fill in the space. I'll bring it up.
Just gonna share that, like, I am gonna take and refresh my certification. I'm gonna take class with Laura on Monday for the manager training. So
you'll report back if it's any good.
But I would say, like, in learning about this food freedom law and taking that class with Sam last year about it, and the big piece of it being liability, that to protect yourself, if you're going to produce that way, you really to invest the money in making sure that you're educated before you pursue something that's going to put you in a position that if something does happen, and you haven't had any training and haven't done even any of the pieces, even using this tool that Sam's going to introduce, I think it's super important, like, to get that education. However, but like, know that like that resource is out there with Laura, but also to use Sam's tool. Anyway, I think it's a wise investment if people are going to do the Food Freedom Act.
Well, and that's a good point. And then also to that same point, it's something that people are do know what it is. And so you might have to get creative with how you weasel it in there, but to use the fact that you have gone through, you know, some sort of food safety training can be a selling point to your buyers as well. And I've seen people from personal chefs who do that to restaurants that frame their certificates. You know, there's different ways that you can let the public know that you have that type of certification. And, you know, it's not a tremendous amount of time, but I've been teaching the classes just as my you know, it's what I focus on for 5 years. And so I've been through in some interesting, like these in that, like, you know, starting out before COVID and then having COVID hit. And when we first started to reopen after COVID was one of the busiest times we'd ever had, because people were really searching for ways to let their customer know that the food was safe. And it's interesting because being in Bozeman and kind of sort of weathering the storm of what happened with Dave's Sushi, and we were able to work with them, which was a nice experience. I mean, it was a devastating experience, but it was nice to be able to help a restaurant on the other side of a tragedy like that. But interestingly, it wasn't limited to that, just that like that establishment. As a community, we had like the biggest class we ever had was right after that happened. It had like 70 people in it or something. And so there's different times when people come flocking to food safety, but I think that liability, like you're talking about, it is definitely one of the biggest times. And what it's kind of a little bit of a not super big point, but I did remember what I was going to say, which was just that, you know, I am a very strong believer in like in-person trainings for the 8-hour manager training. People lose a lot when they sit down. What's offered for the online trainings for the 8-hour one is a quite a bit of information in a, you know, no live presenter type fashion. And so people think, oh, I'm going to get that training online and this is going to be great and easy. And what happens is they spend quite a bit of money to go through an 8-hour course, but they kind of just click through it and they don't really pay attention. And then at the end, they have to take a 2-hour, 90-question proctored exam, and people end up not passing, understandably so. And I just had a brief conversation with a former sanitarian. Oh, well, she is a current sanitarian out in Helena, and she didn't really go into a lot of detail, but she made a point to say that their county was trying really hard to start offering in-person trainings because they were seeing an issue with people taking the online training and then the knowledge not getting to the field, like it wasn't translating correctly. And I absolutely totally believe that that's the case. So I am happy that there's an online training available for people who just truly can't get to an in-person training or find an in-person proctor or any of those logistical issues that people have. But that in general, I just always hope that people will either make it to a class, or I really hope that they'll make it to my class. But I think just in-person trainings in general are the information is just they're just not comparable to me. I'm that passionate about it.
I have a question somewhat related, unless we're limited on time. I don't know if it's a really important question. Some of the things that I come across that really discourage people is the liability litigation aspect. And, you know, you're putting all of your assets on the line and someone gets sick and you could lose everything. I've never known of a business where someone got sick and they lost everything. I think, you know, Dave Sushi's pretty unique situation with the mushrooms and everything. I'm just wondering, is that like how common is that for someone to, you know, slip up in their food safety practice or not have a fully trained staff employee, and then have it just like bring the whole business down.
I think Sam had some stats. Do you have from like the course that I took last year? Did you have stats of like how often that ever actually happens?
You know, I think the stats that I had, ironically, are that most foodborne illness incidents originate in the home, where we attribute them to a commercial setting, but it's far more prevalent for us to make ourselves and our family sick. I actually don't know the prevalence or the occurrence rate of like devastating food. And I don't know, Laura, if you maybe have more insight into how often it is.
I definitely don't have any statistics, but I do have something that sort of just came to mind where information might be found. I think if you looked at it like nationally or across the world, it's probably a lot more prevalent than any of us think. But at the same time, I think that everything that has been said about making ourselves sick at home is also definitely something that a lot of sanitarians recognize, that people make themselves sick. What I thought of, I was going to put it in the message if I can figure out how to do it, is just, well, that doesn't look right. When I teach the class, I talk about the Jack in the Box outbreak. I know a lot of instructors do that, but I teach it from sort of like an emotional, I torture the students and tell them a horribly sad story in the beginning part of the day, which is not very nice, but it seems to work. I talk about, you know, what happened with Jack in the Box from all the aspects of the children that passed away and the families, and then Jack in the Box, and then so on and so forth. And one of the things that I talk about is there's this guy who was one of the lawyers involved in that case, and he went on to start a website, or not a website, but a law firm that strictly does, it's like the food safety law firm. I think it even says that. It's out of Seattle. And I was going to put a link to his website because I'm not an expert on what's on there, but I have gone there before because he and the firm put up a lot of like just short, entertaining videos about different foodborne illness ones. And it was interesting because to me, he's sort of like this celebrity big guy that I never thought I would ever interact with. And when the Dave Sushi thing happened, their law firm, you know, caught wind of it. So did a lot of people, and they wrote a blog article about what was going on at Dave Sushi. And so really truly going through that experience with them and with the community, it brought it home. I mean, I usually tell operators that for me, when I first started out with the cupcakes and stuff, especially since I had just left the health department, I had sort of this of like probably over the top fear of maybe making someone sick, because even though everybody thinks, oh, I can't make anybody sick from cupcakes, it's like, well, if I get raw batter onto my ready to eat frosting, then I absolutely can make somebody sick. And so I try to hone in on the classes of like having a healthy fear of what could happen, but then just doing your best, you know, with proper training, you know. And that's where I try to operate. If I was going to be in a food business, I would try to operate with the understanding that it's probably unlikely to happen, especially if I do my best. But in the event that something did happen, I would definitely want to make sure that I'm protected in all the ways possible, whether it's having the proper licensing, making sure I have, you know, an LLC or whatever it is, as well as liability insurance and training and this, that, and the other. You know, I'll finish with this. My daughter's home now, so it'd be more loud, but she's 4 now, so she's almost 4. But that may have just distracted me too much. But licensing. I always lose my train of thought. I don't want to torture you guys, so go ahead and pause on me, but
Well,
yeah.
the other thing, so you're asking about, gosh, what was you were, Liz, you were asking about like, so the foodborne illness, or whether you said that specifically, but the other thing to know, and I don't have stats on that either, is that a lot of the things come through cross-contamination. It's not necessarily someone's getting a foodborne illness, but their allergies are like so prevalent. People's allergies have just like escalated. And I remember from the time I was a waitress, the fear of making someone sick was from me serving them something that I didn't understand what was in something that could make them sick. If they say they have a dairy allergy, or they're allergic to cilantro, or whether it's an allergy or preference, but from that beginning of like knowledge of what's going to make someone sick through an allergy, I guess it's just also an education of not just like making sure your temps are right, but also making sure you understand food and the allergies that are in food and what can make somebody sick. And then it goes into labeling. So it doesn't answer your question of this. Well, I guess somebody put that stat in there. 1 in 6 estimate. The CDC estimates that 1 in 6 Americans become sick from foodborne diseases each year. But anyway, it doesn't, those are foodborne illnesses. I guess cross-contamination wouldn't necessarily be a full foodborne illness, or I guess it would fall in that category. Anyway, it's another piece of knowledge, right? It's so just something.
You're talking more like in terms of informing the consumer with, labeling or including it on your menu, or being sure you have that information out
And
there.
starting from the person who's making it, that they understand what they're doing and what they're putting in stuff, like,
Yeah.
they understand their ingredients, and then they are able to communicate it and label and do all the preceding things to make sure that they're keeping the customer safe.
I have never done that, but I know that ServSafe has like an online training that I would imagine, if it costs anything, is maybe similar to the food handler one, but I'm guessing they have a training now available specific to allergens, like to the point that you're talking about, because it is such a prevalent thing and a need in the community, that people are aware. And cross-contamination is just as much foodborne illness as anything else, for sure. And it does, depending on which regulations people fall, and food labeling. There's food labeling, at least for if you're operating under the cottage food regulations. Food labeling is one of the most difficult, time-consuming, maybe even costly, type parts of the endeavor, in my opinion anyway. And so, especially when it comes to allergens, if people maybe cut corners and don't do all their labeling, because who's going to catch me or whatever. And I've kind of been guilty of that myself. So no judgment, it's expensive. But to that point, being able to communicate what's in your product and understanding how to communicate that with your customers, and understanding that if they have a true allergy, you can't just like have peanut butter hanging around in the kitchen while they have a peanut allergy and things like that. So I think, to your point, I think there are specific trainings just about allergens because of how important they are and how prevalent they are today.
Okay.
And I think a theme that I'm picking up today is also, it's ironic, like we have all these regulations that force us to do these kind of reviews and to be in a space that's conducive to safety and to have these levels of training. And, the Local Food Choice Act gives us an opportunity to operate outside that, but it doesn't mean that you have to throw all the benefits of those regulatory processes out with it. So, Kristen, you even said like, it's probably not a bad idea to look through a cottage food license. application and just look what they're actually asking you to do, because those are the areas that help you identify the points of risk. Unfortunately, I don't think that our sanitarians throughout the state likely have the extra time on their hands. But this law also, so specific to products, and I'm talking about raw milk right now, the law disallows the state to come in and regulate, but it doesn't disallow DPHHS to offer input. So if you, particularly with that product, it's a high-risk product. If you go to the state and you say, you know, I would like to learn about this, or can you review my blah, 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 they are able to offer assistance. They just can't, it can't be the other way around. So I don't know that sanitarians have an opportunity, but you know, I think one of the things that we're missing is that nuanced look at like, oh, here's your product flow. Like that's actually, this is the area that you need to look at. Or, oh, did you know that you're making a product that's high risk without even realizing it? Something like that. If we don't have any pending questions right now, I might shift to take the last few moments to check out the Arrow toolkit.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. I mean, you guys are not seeing what I want you to see. Hold on one second. Are you seeing the toolkit?
Mhm.
Okay, great. Okay, so through this project, again, Arrow's focus has been on giving tools to identify liability and potential risks under the Local Food Choice Act. So we've created this toolkit. It's like literally an amalgamation of, we took kind of the standard commercial food safety regulatory review processes and tried to make them more approachable, take out the lingo, and have them focused on particularly the areas that are of the biggest concern in a home kitchen. So this will be free on Arrow's website. We've had a bunch of copies printed and are also available through our partnership with Abundant Montana. You can get them through your local food coordinators, and a lot of them are targeted at likely through the farmers market. So Erin can jump in and tell me if that's not the correct way to say how to get one. You can also, go ahead.
Oh no, everything you said is true. And I dropped my email in the chat. If you are trying to get a hard copy and not finding them where you want, you can reach out directly too.
So we're just gonna kind of do a quick and dirty review of what is in here. So what you can see from the table of contents, the food safety assessment is kind of general food safety practices combined with good manufacturing practices, which the idea is like, these are the things that you have to set up that are common regardless of what your product is. And then the second half of the tool is kind of a HACCP review process that's really focused on what is the particular flow of your product and what are the specific areas that either you can control risk or introduce risk. So this is made to be heavy on the assessment piece and a light on the information. So each section is going to have a little blurb on, okay, why are we thinking about suppliers? The idea is basically your food's only, this is exactly what happened with Dave's. So if you're creating a product, your safety starts with your suppliers. So in a lot of our kind of small home-based entrepreneurs, they might want to be using alternative sources. So local growers, farmers market vendors. So it just begs the question, what are your suppliers' food safety practices? So each section has a checklist. So again, the idea is to be applicable to every producer, regardless of what their product is, and to just ask questions that you should be thinking about. So again, to highlight these areas that you might have risk when you're not even aware of it. So just looking at this, you know, we're talking about your sources. What are their food safety protocols? Ingredient tracing. So these are all things that you're forced to do in a commercial space when you have different levels of licensing. But it's great for us all to think about, like, oh, what happens if my local farm comes to me and says, hey, guess what? The whatever I sold you, it was contaminated. How are you going to contact your customers? How are you going to trace your own ingredients, etc. And then, you know, again, some of these things are things that you're going to get from just general food safety courses. So we're going to go back up and then jump down to our HACCP section. So HACCP is a very structured review and protocol system that I find so encumbered in jargon that it's almost not applicable to home producers. So again, what we try to do is take the concepts and make them accessible to anybody regardless. So this is just an example of what that might look like. So the HACCP tool basically helps people look at the product flow. And you know, you might have a raw product. You might have a product that's not reheated, etc. So this is kind of just a generic format. And in each of these categories, we helped people identify areas that might be an issue. And this is just an example. Again, if you read the second column, again, they're different when you're making it from home. We talked about that earlier. Cross-contamination when you have a toddler in your kitchen is different than it would be in a commercial setting. So same with, like, how are you cooling your products? Maybe a home refrigerator is great for you, but if you're cooling 5 gallons of soup, you're probably not going to get that temperature in the range that you need it to. So this tool again is trying to take the generalized process review and make it functional for a home space. And then it also includes some resources at the end. Again, Arrow has some kind of tailored resources for this topic. Some other good options are extension. Believe it or not, there are some states that even for a cottage food producer have specific food safety courses that are specific to that industry. So Colorado has some of those. So those are also options. And then we point you to on down the road to the Montana Manufacturing Extension Center, et cetera. So that is the toolkit in a nutshell. Does anyone have any questions specific to this resource?
Is this on the website now?
You know, that is a good question. Erin, do you know that answer?
Yeah, I can drop, if we're comfortable with it, Sam, I can drop a link in the chat right now to where you can find it online.
Give me that. This looks amazing. I'm going to spread this around. Yeah, I have a resources page that we haven't quite made live on our website yet, but this will be the perfect addition to it. Yeah, this is, I know you guys have been working on this for a while, so this looks wonderful. yeah,
Big
recycle.
kudos to Sam. She has really spearheaded this whole project. Here is the link, Liz. And for everybody here, this lives on not on Arrow's website. It's another domain that Arrow updates and owns, I guess, called the Montana Food System Resources Library. Clunky name, working on the marketing there. However, all of the resources that Arrow has built out over the last 5+ years in the cottage food and home producer, value-added producer space live on this website as well. So this is a link directly to the food safety tool for home producers. You can also find there all of our other resources in this space too. Liz, I would also be curious and happy to work with you directly about if you want like more than one copy to be sharing with folks who come and process up at the Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center.
I'd want to say yes. I mean, that gets into the processing facility realm, which I'm not quite a part of. Like, you know, we kind of overlap a little bit. So I'd like to start with one hard copy, let them have it and kind of review it with them and see what they want to do with it. In the very least, like when I have one-on-ones with folks, it's so much easier to have that instead of being like, come sit at my computer and like check out stuff. Yeah, it looks really, really great though. Nice job, Sam. Very good. Can I also put your resource library on our resources page? Sweet. Very nice. Okay. Yes, I will.
Meant to be used.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, this is great. You guys, really great. I know I off the top of my head, I immediately have 3 people I'm going to forward this to. And I'll let the processing facility know. And I'd love to have hard copies in here for them. I don't know how they would prefer to do stuff, but it makes sense to me. So, you know, yeah, super cool.
I just have one last question for your guys's perspective on. One thing that we grappled with in how to present in this tool is just the idea of a written food safety plan. And we chose to present it as basically, it's really great to document what you're doing. Well, first of all, it's great to make policies and procedures that address the areas that you need to, like you mentioned, Kristen, a routine is super important. And as we've all identified, like, especially when you're sharing space. And then like, if you don't write it down, if you don't have some way to verify that you did it, it's hard to take that up. It's hard to use that in kind of justification or in defense of your procedures. So do you guys have any insight into beyond that? Like, is it useful? Is it helpful? Have you seen folks that, or what do you do maybe is a good question? Or what did you do when you were producing?
Go ahead. No, it's fine.
I mean, I would just go back to kind of the, I mean, obviously I've worked at restaurants where you have those logs, you're entering in by the hour, by the day. But at home, I think, yeah, the best thing to do is have that routine and maybe just like type it out or make like a checklist of like, when I get up, when I do my process, this is where I start. Like clean clothes, clean rags, clean apron, clean surfaces, check refrigerator, make sure the oven thermometer is in the oven. And then other routines that you can create within that of like knowing like where you're going to store things. And a lot of it is like that HACCP stuff was like, when I go to the store, am I going to bring a cooler? Again, a routine. Like I'm going to bring a cooler when I go to the store. I'm going to put the things that need to be refrigerated in the cooler, you know, if they're going to be in there for a long time, especially in the summer, and just have it written of, sorry, let me say it again, routine. And so just a checklist of the things that you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. A log is a bit fastidious for a home cook, right? Like it's just you. you're just trying to do your things. You're probably trying to do other things because you are at home, your kids, your dog, your family. So yeah, I would go in the realm of like a routine written out and a checklist maybe of the things that you're going to make sure that you do every day. That would be my input. And Laura, I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Just like everything else, I agree with all the things that you've said. I think that I had like kind of heavy experience working in Yellowstone just for the concessionaire before I was a sanitarian. And they're regulated by multiple entities, from a sanitarian to the National Park Service to whatever. So they, of course, have quite a few logs, and they have policies and, SOPs and all sorts of documentation. And I became somewhat used to that. And then I left to become a sanitarian and inspect probably thousands of restaurants in a year. And I was pretty surprised at first at how few places write anything down. I mean, from even just like a temperature log for a buffet line or something to SOPs or HACCP plans and that sort of stuff. So if I inspected a restaurant that did have logs for their refrigerators or cooking temperatures or this, that, and the other, it seemed like that was definitely the exception. I wasn't used to, I think writing things down just becomes very tedious for people who, whether it is just they are totally in a fast-paced environment or they perceive that they're in a fast-paced environment, it always just becomes this thing like, I don't have time to write anything down. And to the point of, if somebody comes back and says, I got sick at your restaurant, and you tempt something, but it's not written down, then you have no proof. And so I think that, if I were to teach a course on how to do certain things, I would include the things that have been said about having a checklist and a routine for, if you are in a home kitchen, preparing for your shift at home, if you will, as opposed to like making some cupcakes and then going and being mom and then taking the dog for a walk and then going to this, that, and the other. And then it becomes scary because some people don't even have the knowledge or the mindset to really understand how important bringing a cooler to the grocery store could be, and so there is so I think that having a log, especially depending on the types of foods that are being produced, from maybe just having a log of your refrigerator to, having other logs, would definitely be where, when you talk to a sanitarian, where the regulations are going. They're going in a documented manner. But I will tell you guys, it'll ruin the story for next week. But one of the stories that I always talk about when it comes to like what people do in home kitchens, if you will, is that you may have heard of this because it was in Missoula. I don't remember the year or anything though, but there was an incident where an unlicensed caterer, this is well before cottage food or any of the stuff was a thing, but an unlicensed caterer had made the food for a conference at a hotel. And quite a few people got sick. And so the sanitarians were doing their food histories, and it came back to the caterer at this conference that they went. So they investigated the caterer, who was unlicensed. And I don't know if the gentleman was just very forthcoming with information, but essentially the reason why people got sick was because he had made like a big hot batch of Indian food and put it into a hefty garbage bag, taken all the shelves out of his refrigerator at home, put the garbage bag into the refrigerator, cooled it down inappropriately, obviously, and then reheated it, I assume inappropriately, the next day or incorrectly, and a bunch of people got sick. So the people who are in this training or in any of the trainings really, I think, have a different mindset than that. But it's sort of, if you don't know, you don't know, or you don't care, you don't care. I don't know. But it's crazy what kinds of things people will do in their home kitchens. So
Do you know, in the event of litigation, like in a court of law, if you're sitting down as a defendant and you have that written log, is that the difference between,
what do you
fiction
think?
or something? I don't know.
Right.
I mean, it seems like that written log would be so crucially important that, like, no matter what your preferences or understanding are, like, having that resource is huge.
I definitely don't think it would hurt, is my opinion, but maybe someone else has better input.
So when it comes to food safety incidents, and we'll wrap up on such a lovely note. It's a civil
You're
case,
welcome.
right? It's a civil case, so it's a jury. So, usually things could be settled outside of an instance with a jury, but it's commonly, unfortunately, not even a person, like, oh, my neighbor who I sell food to would never sue me. It's often an insurance company that has the medical claims. So, and then the jury is tasked with, are they acting reasonable and as another producer in their situation would act? So, my input is often, we are in a situation where we expect food to be safe. We expect allergens to be labeled, and we expect people to have this common understanding. In that case, no one would expect the refrigerator trash bag thing to happen. If you came to the jury and you're like, I don't actually write things down, I think there's a good argument for people expect you to be on top of your training and on top of your procedures, and to ensure that you're at least taking reasonable precautions to create safe food. If you can't demonstrate that, then you are just will it protect you in all occurrences? Maybe not. But again, you're convincing people that you're acting in the best interest of their health, and doing what we kind of expect as normal. So,
yeah, and that makes sense to me. That why wouldn't you? And I can't help but think about when you undergo like GAPS training and you have to keep all these records of all these things. They give you the templates for it. They give you the forms. They make it like super, super easy, and all you have to do is like fill in the date, the temperature of your cooler, and like what kind of product was in there. And at least I don't know if that would be a step that would help people or not, but yeah. Anyways.
well, thank you, everyone. This has been a great discussion and super insightful, and everyone else will have to watch the recording of it. But Kristen and Laura, thank you for your time. And everybody else, thanks for your great questions. Feel free to follow up with myself or with any of the folks on this call for further resources. And I will send out slides, recording, and then additional resources to everybody.
And I learned a couple things today, and I really appreciate the way it was presented. So thank you for having me. And I'm excited to torture Kristen next week for 8 hours.
I'm excited too. Yes, Sam, I think you've created something really valuable. So yeah, happy to be involved on the panel.
Great. Thank you. I didn't do it alone.
No,
Okay.
but take the praise.
Yes.
All right, everybody. We'll see you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.